Hello everyone, this is a video to show you how to pass parameters or variables to callback functions. I'm talking about callback functions of tkinter. So before starting, let me talk about the goal of this video. So what we want to do in this video is to create two widgets. The first is called, or two buttons. The first is a back button, and the second is the next button. Now, if I click on the next button, I want to print a number that gets incremented. So I need to define a number, let's call it n, and if I click on next, I want this number to get incremented by 1 and then print it in the console. Otherwise, if I click on back, then I want to decrement that number. Okay, so this is what I want to do. So it seems simple, but if you don't know about tkinter variables, that you could have troubles with this. So first of all, let me import tkinter as tk and create a master window by saying tk.tk. Now it's time to create buttons. Next equal tk.button. So this should be associated with the master window, and the text is equal to next. Now the back button is equal to the same thing. Let me just copy this, paste it here. So this should be a back button. Alright, so now let's pack these things together. I want the next button to be on the right side and the back button to be on the left side. So I could say back dot grid. So they are both in the same row, so this should be in the row 0. Similarly, for the next button, it should be in row 0, so they are aligned. But back button should be on the left, so this should be in column 0. And the next button should be on the right, so it's column 1. Now I need to show the main window by typing master dot main loop. And here are my two buttons, next and back. So right now they don't do anything. So to add an action, there are two ways. The first way is to use an option here called command equal function, and you define this function here like that. But I don't like it in this way, because the number of events associated with these buttons would be very limited. So I like to use to trigger events with the bind method. So if I click on the next button, I want to bind that with an event and execute something. So this can be done easily with the method dot bind. So I write next dot bind, and here I type. So I have two parameters or two arguments. The first here is the type of the event, and here the function that would get executed. So before, with the command option, you have just one event, which is one click. But here you can define a lot of events. For example, you can define double click, single click on the left, or single click on the right. You can define a mouse entry and so on. So there are a lot of events you can define. So this way of binding events is more flexible. And here you define your function you want to get executed. So this function is called a callback function, in fact. So let me define first the event. So I want a double click So this is defined by the keyword double. And if I want this double click to be only on the right button of the mouse, I write -1. And here I define the callback function, or rather just I type in the name of the callback function. So it should be callback, for example, callback next, right? And now what I want to do is to define this callback here. Define callback next. And one thing is that you need to make sure to define this callback function before this before this binding command here. And the reason is because when the execution gets at the line 13, which is the line that contains this binding, it won't recognize this callback function. For example, if you define it here, then you would have an error. So you should define the function before defining the event or binding the event. So this is how we define the callback function, and what's particular about the callback function is that it takes an argument that's called event. But this event is passed automatically, so you don't need to pass anything. So once you double click on your left button of your mouse, the event is passed automatically. So it's an event object that is associated with many attributes. So let's move on and continue our program. So what I want to do is, as I told you, to if the next button is clicked, I need to print a variable, and of course this variable should get incremented. So one naive way to do that is just by defining this variable. Let's call it statu, and assign the value 0, and here I could say statu equal statu plus 1 and print statu. So you could do this way, or you could just say plus 1 like that. But so this should work normally, but if I double click, if I click once on the next button, nothing happens. But if I double click, you see that I have an error here. And basically what this error tells you is that this variable here is not recognized. So it should be defined first. So basically this variable here is not recognized, and the reason is because it's not a tkinter variable. So only tkinter variables are recognized here, unless you create it inside of this callback function like that. So in that case, yes, this would work, but you would get 1 all the time, so nothing gets incremented. So what's the solution? The solution is by using something that's called tkinter variable. So instead of defining statu as a Python variable, we need to define it as a tkinter variable. We could say statu equal int var 0, and since this is a tkinter variable, it should be prefixed by tk.intvar. Right? So now if I print the type of statu, you would see that it's a tkinter variable. You have here class tkinter int var. So this is an integer, but it belongs to the tkinter class. So now if I define this variable outside of this callback function, it fortunately gets recognized, right? So now I can go and increment this variable here. So let's see now if this works. I need to uncomment that. So now if I click on the next button, I have a mistake again. And the reason is because this is a tkinter variable, we do not increment it in this way. So there is a special way to set a value to that tkinter variable. So you can just type statu. So we need to do that with a method. So we need to set that So you define the value to which you want to set your value. So you can define, for example, 4, like that. So in this way you can access this tkinter variable and print it. And in the same way here, if you want to get the value of the tkinter variable, if I want to print the value of that tkinter variable, you should use the method .get, like that. So in that case, I think that we should get the value 4. I double click on next, so I get the value 4. So now, how do I increment this variable statu? So the first thing is that I need to get it. I need to statu dot get the value, so I can go and store it in a variable v, right? So in the beginning it would be 0, and then I can set that value by saying it's equal to v plus 1. So in this way I could increment the variable statu. Let's try it out and see if this works. Now 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it gets incremented. Now let's do the same thing for the back button. It's not yet defined, so if we understand the principle now, it would be easy for the back button. Just need to bind that with the back button. Let's call that callback function, callback back. And let's define this as double click. So this is the event. So now I need to define this callback function. And all I need to do is to print that text in here. So now if I double click on next, one click, nothing happens. Double click and click on back. Oh, so this keeps on incrementing. So I should have, this should decrement rather than increment. So in this way we could pass variables to callback functions, and I hope this was helpful for you. Thanks for watching.